movie. Hi, guys. Welcome along. Good to see you all. Let's start by introducing our legends up on stage. Big round of applause for Chris.
Hi, everyone.
Hold on. We've got to do it again. Somebody was playing with their phone. Big round of applause for Chris. That's better.
Thanks.
And a big round of applause for Bryce for joining us this morning. Chris and Bryce are from IFWG, which is an independent Australian publishing group. And Chris is, and you're 20 years now, is it? Something like that? On and off?
IFWG's been publishing internationally for about 11, 12 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is it here. This is it. Caped Fear. This is primarily what we're going to talk about. The guys have got a slideshow we're going to go through. As I said before, there are no dumb questions, and we want as many questions as possible. Otherwise, it's just going to be Chris and I talking about our life on the Gold Coast. Not really. So, welcome. Tell us where the Caped Fear came from, the concept, the idea. Quickly that, and then we'll go into the slideshow.
That sounds great. I might throw to my good buddy Bryce Stevens here and to lead that off, but you might hit him with the very specific answer. Who came up with the title Caped Fear?
That was the third editor, who's unfortunately unable to be here today because of self-isolation, and his name is Steve Proposh. And when we came up with the concept of the anthology, we were yet to come up with a title. So we were throwing it back and forth in messages and email, and two people were going, yeah, that's good, and one would go, I'm not really too happy with that. And it took about a week, and then Steve, who's not here, came up with the wonderful Caped Fear, and Chris and I went, brilliant. That's the name. We have the name. And I'd like to see him be here today, but he can't. So yes, that was all Steve.
And it was one of those things. As soon as we tested it out on our publisher or other people, it was just like, oh yeah, that says what the book's all about.
It does, yeah. I know it's a play off Cape Fear with Robert Mitchum first and then Robert De Niro second, but Caped Fear just seemed to fit wonderfully. Yeah.
No, we ignore the Robert De Niro versions, just the Robert Mitchum version.
You're a purist, are you?
Yes.
Robert Mitchum is brilliant.
Yeah. Well, it was because it was so against his type at that stage when he did Cape Fear. So
it was normally the hero, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And
so it was
suddenly
against,
the villain.
Very against type for him to do. Hey, we're just going. I told you we'd rattle. So let's start and go through the things you want to tell us, and then we'll be able to get into the panel, into Q&A.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've had a few questions lately ever since the book came out. How do you get to this stage by getting international authors of the stature of Neil Gaiman and George R.R. Martin to take enough notice of you to actually answer and agree to be in a production like this? Well, it doesn't happen straight away because you have to get through their agents and their publishers, and you don't get to talk to people like this unless you have a track record. So basically we started really small a few years ago now by getting some author and artists and creators from Australia to agree to be in a small press magazines that we used to run. And slowly you get enough people taking notice that you end up filling an issue and you put out your small little magazine, and it keeps working on from there. And then after a few years you say, well, look, I don't want to do magazines anymore. I want to do anthologies, books with illustrations and stuff in them. So what we did is we talked to all the authors and artists and poets and everyone that we knew and said, we have this great idea for an anthology in the H.P. Lovecraft universe. And we'd like to call it Cthulhu Deep Down Under, whereby...
Might even have a slide.
All the stories are set either in Australia or in the Pacific Ocean or New Zealand or Antarctica, and are all authors from Australia or New Zealand. So there's the deep down underside of it. And what we did was we crowdfunded. We asked for more money than what we could possibly get, but we ended up getting a few $1,000s crowdfunding, and we were able to put out a really nice glossy hardcover boutique edition of these, and we had 24 stories and 24 colour illustrations, and we basically financed it ourselves. And it turned out to be such a little minor hit amongst the underground that people started talking about it, and publishers started to notice it. So we approached certain publishers, and they were going, you know, that's a really great idea, but it's just not for us at the moment. So we finally got around to approaching Mr. Jerry Huntman from IFWG Publishing. And he looked at the book and said, you know what, this will work. I like this. So he said to us, I'm not going to put out the book, the huge publication in one volume. How about we put out a volume each year and use some of the stories, some more, and some more for 1, 2, 3. And I'm not going to use the illustrations that would be cost prohibitive, but I can put an illustration in the front and another one on the back, grayscale. And so out of the 24 stories that we had in the original book, he said, well, I'm going to put 10 stories in each book. So that's 30. So you people are going to have to come up with 6 extra stories, which is 2 extra in each volume, and then we'll be able to put out 3 volumes for you. So we approached some more people, and they all agreed to be in it. So Jerry put out 2016, he put out the first volume, 17, 18, and then in 2019, he said, well, look, let's do a New Zealand one as well.
It was fascinating.
Yeah.
The thing had got a little life of its own. So this little one-off project that Bryce, myself, and Steve Proposh did, this very small print run, about a 300-copy single edition, when Jerry published it, because Jerry's IFWG Publishing, he does paperbacks and digital print all over the world. He gets it into the United States, which is that market that you just need to have with science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And the paperback format, as Bryce said, about 12, 13 stories in a volume. That's perfect. There's size and price range and all the rest of it, and he broke it up. But the beauty thing was people started to review it. We started to get positive reviews. People like Ellen Datlow, who does a thing called The World's Best Horror. She was giving it critical ticks in her books. And Jerry went on a trip to New Zealand and came back and said, I've got a dozen New Zealand authors clamouring at me to publish a New Zealand version. Would you guys do it? And we gave the captain's cap to Bryce for that one, because Bryce is originally from NZ, although he's lived in Australia for many, many years now. And we repeated the formula, and it went over great there.
So he's like Far Lap and Russell Crowe. We just claim him as our own now.
And I have to say that there's a wonderful lady horror writer from New Zealand, Miss Lee Murray, and she's a twice Bram Stoker Award winner. And I didn't know any New Zealand authors at this stage because I'd been here for so long. And so we contacted her, and she says, I've got just the people for you. And so she gave me the names of 12 New Zealand writers who she thought were up and coming, and they all said, yes, we'd love to be in this volume. And there was very little editing to do on their stories because they're just so good.
He's very modest.
Yeah.
He worked his backside off on this one.
Yeah, so, and we called it Cthulhu, Land of the Long White Cloud. And it was a very well-received 4th volume in the series.
Just digressing for 1 second, who did the cover art?
Jerry had this guy, and this is one of the other things. Jerry's a really smart publisher and a really strategic thinking publisher. And he said, there's this guy called Steve Santiago in the USA, and if you're doing H.P. Lovecraft themed fiction, this guy is really popular with a group called the H.P. Lovecraft E-Zine. It's a whole community on digital fiction. And this guy does a lot of artwork for that. He said, I want that guy because he brings his own audience. And so Santiago did all the covers for this series. And that's volume number 3, the last one we did. And, you know, he took notes and feedback from us really well.
Well, the good thing is that Jerry gave us leeway to, since we were using Steve, he said, I'll give you guys the covers. You come up with the concept. Steve will do them for you. So he didn't actually dictate, this is what your guys' covers are going to be, which a lot of publishers actually do that. So we were very thankful that he gave us the opportunity to come up with the concepts of, and Steve just went with it and said, I can work with that. So we did that for each volume. The fourth volume took a little while because we were sort of like, yeah, no, oh, that's good, yeah. But we finally got around to all agreeing on it. We sent the concept to Steve, and he came up with this wonderful cover for The Long White Cloud. Do we have a slide?
It was just there before. Go back one, yep.
Yeah.
There it is.
So, yeah, the concept was having this flying creature coming down from, which you can see there, coming down from space, and you can see the globe with New Zealand down there. And we thought, that's a very effective concept. So we gave it to Steve, and that's what he came up with.
But we
wonderful.
started, all this stuff, we started to get quite a little buzz going, and we had originally teamed up, Bryce, me, and Steve, to do that one big collection, but there was a lot
The
of
crowdfunding one.
Yeah, and we thought, well, we might be in this for the long haul. We might start looking broader and being in this for a longer term. And we sort of loosely called ourselves Horror Australis. And then we did this one. A completely different publisher approached us and asked us to do that one. And that one got write-ups in the weekend newspaper.
It did, yes. We didn't really want to be confined to Cthulhu books. We really wanted to branch out, so we thought science fiction. And I think you came up with, how about we work in the H.G. Wells, but have it down under, like Australia Bound or something like that.
Because we
So that
worked
was
with
all
all
Chris,
these,
that one.
Yeah, and we worked with all these Aussie authors, brilliant Aussie short story writers, and you know, we thought if we unleash another concept, they'll kill it. They'll just do something amazing. I think somebody in the audience, Jason Franks, guilty. You're a contributor
There he
to
is.
War of the Worlds Battleground Australia.
Guilty as charged.
You know,
So that doesn't mean you get to sit here and sign, okay? Just go down to their table and
and
sign.
I mean, talk about the talent that's in this country. That makes our job as editors so easy. I mean, this man came up with a story that was about Martians invading Australia, but with a contemporary twist that also manages to be a clever joke at the expense of public servants. So, I mean, the imagination just is great in this country.
But we do have, as with so many things, Australia really punches above its weight with a lot of our authors, and that people don't recognise just how good a lot of our authors really are. You know, so it's good to see avenues being opened up for them by people like yourself.
And as we work through the rest of this talk today, I mean, the list of names on the cover is a who's who of the best in science fiction, fantasy and horror. There are two Aussie names there. There's Jack Dan and Janine Webb are both Victorian-based writers. Jack's originally from the USA, but he's been lived here for about 20, 30 years. And we were absolutely thrilled that we have one of the best male and one of the best female science fiction fantasy writers in the world, and they happen to live in Australia. Yeah. And they happen to live in Australia. And we're absolutely proud that they're alongside that absolutely stellar lineup there. So, yeah, do we want to say anything more about how we got here, mate, or do you want to talk about the stories? What would you prefer?
Well, the good thing is that with the original anthology series that we had out, a lot of the authors, really top-class authors, they said, if you guys are doing any more projects, can you keep us in mind? So we've had a crossover with Cape Fear and the H.G. Wells, and a lot of the authors are actually working in different fields now just to get in our anthologies. And it's wonderful to have them along, to trust us enough.
And as we were talking about before, we'd started to get these little, you know, bits of notice internationally, and it helps that Jerry's stuff is published internationally. So when we went for Cape Fear, when we started to do a wish list of names to be in Cape Fear, some cases we had contacts. People had said, seen your work, love your work. And in other cases, we made an approach, as Bryce mentioned before, to an agent or a publicist or a publisher or a friend of a friend. Sometimes we had a writer friend who was a friend of a big name, and we said, oh, we got this concept, would you like to be in this book? Hoping they'd even bother to answer our email. And we were surprised at the reactions we got sometimes, but sometimes the thing was we could say, they could go, who are you? And why are you harassing me?
Well, no, they actually did their homework, I think, before they even bothered to get back to us. And they probably were going, okay, yeah, maybe these people are worth getting back to. Okay.
So we're quite lucky.
So we were very lucky to get these people, extremely.
So, I mean, what I've done is I put a slide of each for each story. Robert Bloch, of course, is no longer with us. He passed away many years ago. But I knew of an obscure Robert Bloch superhero story. He's the master of horror. He created Psycho. And I knew of a superhero story he'd written that had rarely, if ever, been republished since it first appeared in like 1950 or something. And I knew his agent. And actually, I knew his late agent, Marty Shapiro. And I asked Marty if we could get the rights to the story, and Marty said yes, and then Marty passed away, and we got put onto Mr. Bloch's literary agent, Rich Henshaw. And, yeah, they just were totally into the fact that we thought that Robert Bloch was a master. It was a rare story. It deserved to get in front of an audience. So that was kind of easy. We got treated with complete seriousness.
And it fit in exactly with the theme that and the parameters that we were looking for.
Now, before we go much further, I just want you all, because I know you've been looking at the slides, but I don't know how much of it has really sunk in. Have a look at the names under Caped Fear. You've got Neil Gaiman and George R.R. Martin, who have put stories into this book. Does that give you an indication of just what level these guys are travelling at these days? So, yeah, well done. Congrats. Really good.
Look, we were really thrilled to be out. And I've got a good Neil Gaiman story when we get to Neil.
Okay.
Yep. The next one, Ramsey Campbell. Now, we've got to thank Steve for this. Steve Prope.
Yes, the gentleman who can't be with us today. We were doing this little magazine down here in Melbourne called Blood Songs, and Steve happened to review a couple of Ramsey's books early on, and him and his partner were saying they were going overseas to England and travelling around, and he suggested, well, how about I just try and look up Mr. Campbell? I might even get an interview with him. So it turns out that Ramsey was very accommodating. So they invited Steve and his partner around to their home, and they just sat down, had a coffee and a sandwich and had a talk, and Steve had the microphone, did a wonderful interview with him, and which we published in the magazine. And then years later, Ramsey's in contact with us, and we said to him, hey, how would you like to do an introduction for a new anthology we're doing? And he agreed. Of course, he's such a busy man, as are all writers. And he said, well, you know, I can't really do it for free. Is there a price that we can negotiate? And
we said, you bet.
Anything you want. And he dropped his price way down so we could afford it, because he knew how much money we had. And so he provided this wonderful introduction. And we had a friend who's part of the Sherlock Holmes scene in Australia.
Philip
Cornell. And he did a wonderful drawing of Ramsey, just a face like that, just down to here. And we used that in the introduction to his introduction, and that killed it.
Yeah. So that was for that, boutique hardcover, the limited edition hardcover. But Ramsey, that re-established the connection with Ramsey. So
helped sell the book.
So when we came back and said, have you got anything for Cape Fear, Ramsey? He said, I got a killer. I won't say what it's about because it's absolutely...
It is.
It's absolutely terrifying. Ramsey is considered to be one of the greatest living writers of the horror story in the world. He's a grandmaster. So we were thrilled to get him. And he's doing more stuff, brand new stuff for IFWG for us. So, yeah, it's a thrill. Jack Dan we mentioned before. Jack Dan, and the picture there of Jack Dan and Barry and Nalsberg. Now their story, The Towers of Eden, a really bizarre apocalyptic superhero story in this book, brand new for this book. Do you want to sort of talk about your impressions when you read that, mate?
It's bizarre, it's wonderful, it's frightening. Those are the three words I can come up with. That's probably it. And it's a novella.
Yeah.
So it's not just a flash-in-the-pan 5-page story. It's a wonderful piece of storytelling.
This story was so unique and so powerful and kind of psychedelic and trippy too. This was so powerful that we are now in negotiations to do a graphic novel series based on it for IPI Comics, which is going to fall out of IFWG Publishing in the next 20 months or so. It's really brilliant and imaginative.
And the length just fits right in.
Well,
with,
in that case, I look forward to when we get to do that panel in about a year and a half's time here at Supanova.
It's a real piece of visionary writing, just beautiful writing. Then we got, now this is another one. Colin Duran has won Bram Stoker Awards for doing adaptations, comic book adaptations of Neil Gaiman novels like Snow, Glass and Apples, what's that one the other month, the Chalice or something, and then the Troll Bridge. So she's a long-standing comics illustrator. This is her first short story she's ever written on her own, and she did it just for us. I met her in 2016 at New York Comic Con. She's a mutual friend of another author that we published in Cthulhu Deep Down Under Volume 3, Julie Dietrich. So Julie introduced me to her over the internet, and I met her. And then we were looking for names for this book, and I thought, I'll ask Colleen. It's her first short story. It's killer. It's absolutely insane killer. People who know the old Legion of Superheroes, DC Comics, she's taken her own spin on that and fused it with a really full-on horror concept. And yeah, because people associate Colleen with beautiful, lyrical, fantasy, princesses and other kinds of tropes, but this is out there, isn't it? Yeah.
Why is it always the most innocent-looking ones are the ones that usually come up with the most horrific stories?
They're hiding it well, aren't they?
Yeah, very well.
So we were thrilled that she honoured us with her first bit of prose fiction. So this is something of a coup for us. Speaking of Mr. Gaiman, he and a friend of his, Ros Cavini, wrote a short story here. It is also... this story is mostly new stories, but there are a couple of reprints. The reprint by Neil Gaiman and Ros Cavini in this, you won't find it anywhere, right? You just won't find it. He hasn't reprinted it in any of his other books. I found it, and I went to them. How did we get his email in the first place, mate? I forgot how we...
That could have been Steve that got that email address, yeah.
And, or did we get it... We found Ros and approached Ros, and she asked Neil. That might have been it.
No, it escapes me at the moment how we actually got around to getting the address.
Neil Gaiman's email back to us was something like, bloody hell, how'd they find out about this? Yeah, what do you think, Ros? And Ros said, yeah, I'm okay if you're okay, Neil. So they're fine. And I have got a Neil Gaiman story. So we're negotiating with Neil and Ros for the rights for this story that no one's seen, and they've both said yes. They said, just come to us when you've got the publisher's deal in place and send us a contract. So we put the book together and we're shopping around the publishers, and we tried several before we settled with IFWG. But we're still talking to them via email. Go back a couple of years. I'm in the buffet line at San Diego Comic Con one morning to get my breakfast. At the Coronado Hotel. I'm just there in the line with my friend writer Les Klinger. I'm just getting some scrambled eggs, and Les taps me on the shoulder and says, "Oh, Chris, meet my friend Neil." I turn around, and standing behind me with his own plate with bacon on it is Neil Gaiman. And I'm sort of like a dribbling fanboy, and I'm just, nice to meet you, Mr. Gaiman. And I said, we actually know each other because we've been negotiating to republish your story. And he said, oh, great, you're that guy. Well, good luck with that. So, I actually got my breakfast in line with Neil Gaiman. So that was pretty cool.
It actually, what it is, the beginning of the story is a prologue in a book in capsules, and it's the epilogue. But when you put them together, it's an entire story, a cohesive story. They just separated it down the middle, intro, outro for a book. And I don't think it's ever been printed before as a complete unit. So this would be its first time, I would say. Yeah.
And Roz has ended up, she writes some wonderful poetry. IFWG has started publishing some of her poetry. Sylvia Canton Rondoni, a Canberra-based anthologist and poet, she's edited a collection, and it was awesome that Roz is in that collection. So now that's Heather Graham. She writes lots and lots of thrillers under the name Heather Graham, or her full real name, Heather Possessier, Possessere. And she was just a cold contact. We just said, we're doing a book.
We had a list of names who we would like to contact.
We did.
Yeah.
And we thought, she's a good, noted female writer. She might be able to do something with us. And we sort of respectfully approached her and said, we've got these people. Would you want to? And she was just like, I'm in, straight away. I'm in. So that's this sort of slow building of reputation. They know that you're not a crackpot when you can say, I've worked with this person, and this person. So that was a treat. Karen Harbour. Do you want to talk about this one? This was the political one. That was interesting, wasn't it? The whole about the presidential office. Yeah. Now, Karen Harbour's a great science fiction writer.
That is a good one, yeah. I haven't read this book for about 4 months now.
This is the one where it was written at the height of the last US presidency, shall we say?
Oh, yeah, very satirical.
Yeah, and we gave her some feedback and some notes on this because at one stage she was doing some really clever, caustic satire on the state of things, and we said, there's only one problem. You've possibly gone a bit far in this little section, because if the book comes out after that presidency is concluded, people won't quite interpret it the right way. And she actually came back to us and said, these are great notes. I'm going to change it the way you suggest. I'm going to have a rethink of that bit. So, absolutely.
Yes, it can't be seen to be taking sides.
Yeah. And it would have dated it too much.
And it would become a political diatribe otherwise, really.
And she actually completely changed the gender of a character and a few other things. And it was like twice the story just by one clever sort of re-examination of it. Absolute delight and professional to work with. Marvel fans. Guy in the purple shirt there is Jim Starlin, who created Thanos. I think anybody recognise the man in the cap?
No,
no
he doesn't.
idea.
I can't recognise that man.
And the other guy is the late Howard Keltner. Now, Peter, you've got that copy. I've got.
No, put it back there.
Do you want to find the pages?
Okay, yes.
There is one actual comic strip in this book, an 8-page comic strip, and no fooling. Before George R.R. Martin became a international success as a prose writer, he tried to be a comics writer. And before Jim Starlin sold his first artwork to Marvel Comics, doing Captain Marvel, the cosmic superhero, he also was trying out on small independent black and white comics in America. And the guy in the black and white photo, the late Howard Keltner, he had this little company. It's long gone now. And he paid George R.R. Martin and Jim Starlin to do a couple of short black and white superhero stories about this weird Lovecraftian ultra creepy superhero called Dr. Weird. He was like sort of like a cross between Doctor Strange and Conan the Barbarian. He was quite sort of visceral and somewhat violent, and he's fighting sort of giant Lovecraftian spiders and things like this. And it was totally brilliant. Even then, you could see, yeah. And this was like about 1970 or something. I've forgotten the date of it. So this was before Stalin's career, before George R. Martin's prose career took off. They were just starting out, and he was sending, I've read interviews where he was sending stuff to comics publishers, he was sending stuff to science fiction magazines, and it was the science fiction magazines that started buying his stuff. And that's when he said, I'll forget the comics, I'm selling more stuff over here. But this is an absolute treat because it's good. That's the thing.
I don't think it's ever been published since its original run, has it?
I think it got a tiny reprint somewhere, but some obscure one-off comic, you know.
Okay, yeah.
But I don't know if all the Georgia, because there was a few people that did Dr. Weird for them, because this Howard Kelton, the guy created Dr. Weird. George R. Martin didn't create him. Yeah. Now, that's a picture of big Marvel and DC Comics writer Jim Krueger. Jim mostly does comics. He's a New York Times best-selling comics guy. He does a lot of stuff with Alex Ross. He did the Earth X for Marvel. He did Justice for DC with a beautiful painted Alex Ross artwork by his mate Alex Ross. I've become friends with Jim just from bumping into him at San Diego Comic-Con and having a chat. And it was just one of those weird things, like we like the same stuff. And we started talking, and I said, Jim, do you ever want to write short stories? And he said, I love short stories. No one ever asked me. I said, well, I'm doing a short story collection on superheroes and horror. Can you do anything? He said, I've got the idea. And that's how Jim came in. And Jim is now shifting gears, and he's doing more and more short stories, and eventually we're going to have a collection of original stuff by Jim. But Jim, for this book, did a story that is, he's taken that classic concept of the big iconic Superman level superhero with a immortal, with a never relenting arch villain, and he's flipped the whole thing upside down in a way that you wouldn't imagine. You've got a villain succeeding or seeming to succeed, and it's almost that the success for the villain gives him more grief than the superhero used to. So it's a really original, fresh, clever story. And Jim's doing other stuff with me now. He's doing a Dracula story for me for Dracula Unfanged coming out in May this year. He's a very clever writer. Oh, another one of our heroes.
Have anybody seen a series on TV recently in the last couple of years called Hap and Leonard? It's about two guys that live in Texas, and they're always getting into scrapes and adventures with sinister beings and criminals and coming out on top. Well, that's Joe wrote that series. I think it was for HBO, wasn't it? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, one of those networks.
And it's
Sundance. It was a network.
Was it?
Yeah. I think HBO.
And the first series was a success, so they commissioned the second series, which has done very well. Joe is a wonderful writer. He's a lot of his stuff is quite gruesome, but he always has fun. He always has fun with it. So one minute you're going, oh, and then the next minute you're laughing. And he was very open about saying, yeah, I'd be interested in providing some work for you. So he had an unused novella, which he was still about to shop around. And he said, would you guys like to see a novella? It's quite long, probably longer than you would like for your anthology. And we were going, and so he said, yes, please, can you show it to us? And we just leapt at the chance to work with him.
And he's another one of these top-tier fantasy writers. So Joe R. Lansdale has done dozens of crime books, dozens of horror novels. he's even dabbled in comics. He wrote an episode of Batman the Animated Series, and he did a Jonah Hex series for DC Comics. So we knew he had a little bit of connection to comics and superheroes and stuff. So as Bryce was saying, we approached him, and again we had our track record to represent ourselves there before we're approaching a big guy like that, and we went after a story called The Drive-In that had superheroes in it, or I think it was The Drive-In. And he, as Bryce said, he offered us something else. He said, I got this other thing called The Steam Man. And he said there was a comic take done on it, but the short story, the novella-length story, has never been published. So you guys will be getting it first. Yeah, it's got a
wonderful Joe Lansdale title.
Yeah, and it's violent, it's steampunk, it's antic, it's interdimensional, uber villains with dark ultraviolet tastes.
The Steam Man of the Prairie and the Dark Rider get down.
Yeah. So that was another cracker. So
now Joe, sorry matey, Joe actually wrote a short story called Bubba Hotep. And it came out as a movie several years ago. And
with the chin, wasn't it? Bruce
Sorry?
Campbell. The chin.
Bruce Campbell from Evil Dead fame played Elvis.
If you ever
he was in a nursing home.
If you ever want to see a really funny movie of somebody setting themselves up, watch They Call Me Bruce.
Oh, really? Yes.
Which is Bruce Campbell, where this town is haunted, and these people come and find Bruce Campbell on the set of a movie to come and solve the problem because they believe he is Ash and these sort of characters. So so find that. But Bubba Hotep. Yeah,
Bubba Hotep, and that's wonderful. Mr. Lansdale wrote that.
Yeah, and that dark, violent, antic humour, typical for a Sam Raimi or a Bruce Campbell movie. Joe's writing has always been like that. So we've always huge fans of his.
We're lucky to get a novella from that man, yeah.
Now, Brian Lumley is another sort of like hierarchical god of science fiction, fantasy and horror. He did the Necroscope series of novels, the Vampire series of novels. He's been writing dark fiction for decades. And in fact, reaching out to him for the story in this one, which has got the unlikely title of Melarcrian the Immortal. It's sort of like a Doctor Strange superhero, style superhero coming to a difficult way. But you've got a track record with Mr. Lumley, don't you, mate? You go back there.
Yes, we used to, back in the days of snail mail, just before email, we used to write letters to each other because what we did when we had a little magazine years ago, we approached Brian for a story which had been previously published, and that certainly helped sales on our little magazine. And he was most accommodating. He said, I have just a story for you. So yes, we do have a track record with Brian, and he's always been friendly. He's just a friendly man to everybody. He's not one of these standoffish people that, because he's a big author. And so we were happy to have him in this book, and he's just treated us always kindly over the years.
Somewhere in my collection, mate, I have got a copy of a letter that Brian wrote to you. You'd sent him a comic book that you had inked, that I wrote, Pulse of Darkness #4, and the great Brian Lumley said that he loved that comic.
That was a burst.
Now,
coming from him.
I've just been given the nod that we are rapidly starting to run out of time, believe it or not.
Oh, well, just... Yeah.
So, yeah.
We got Jonathan Marbury, we got William F. Nolan, Robert Silverberg, the awesome Janine Webb, whose book 5-Star Republic we have on our desk this weekend. And we got Mark Waid. So anyone you want me to touch on particularly, Bryce?
Do you want to just wrap it up with Janine?
Okay.
Janine's a wonderful Australian
author. How about
author.
you do Janine and I'll do Mark?
Yeah. No, you go.
No, you do Janine and then I'll do Mark Waid.
Well, Janine, we've worked with her before on some other anthologies, and we said, look, thank you for your wonderful stories. Would you be interested in being in this anthology we're doing called Caped Fear, which is a reverse take on superheroes? It's more or less their sinister side. And she said, I have just the story for you. And it turns out she was absolutely right. We love her work. Yeah. Okay. I'll try and make this quick. The Pearl Beyond Price.
The Pearl Beyond Price.
And it's an excellent story set in the South Seas about a matriarchal society who has to go through rites of passage. And it's very Lovecraftian, and she's just a massively, hugely talented author. And we love having her in all our anthologies.
And yeah, we're getting to do quite a bit of stuff with her, which we're fairly pleased with.
Yes, and she always says, yes, I'm interested.
Indeed. And she was in War of the Worlds Battleground Australia.
Absolutely, yes.
And there's a follow-up book that's being planned for that, and she'll be in that too. And look, just to wrap it up, the introduction for this book is an original introduction written by Mark Waid. And Mark Waid, if you know anything about comics, he's written Marvel, every character at Marvel, every character.
He's huge in the field. Yeah.
He's the publisher at the moment of Humanoids Publishing in Los Angeles, the American arm of the big European company. Mark is the publisher. And I've been lucky to know Mark for about 15 years. I met him when he came out here for a visit once, and we just hit it off. We're born in the same year, and we've got the same pathetic obsessions, etc. So, and we've written a couple of times for Comics in America. He kindly co-wrote something with me, and we're working on something top secret together at the moment. But he wrote a great introduction, and Jerry, our publisher, was really curious what that introduction was going to be like. But when it came in, he actually emailed the three of us and said, wow, he's done a great, yeah, absolutely nailed it. And he goes, in that introduction, he points out that the superhero tradition, you go back to the late 30s, even with Superman, the first series starting in Action Comics, there's tinges of horror elements. Yeah. So a fantastic introduction in this book. So we're pretty lucky.
So now you guys, are you down on the exhibitor floor or over in Artist Alley? Where are you?
Artist Alley.
Okay, and so I can stand up now. Okay, and so launching today, Caped Fear. The guys will actually autograph the copies that you go and buy. So you didn't know that, but you are now doing that. Okay, you're autographing the copies.
And we said we'd give one of these away. Best question.
Best question. Who's got a question? Okay, well I've asked the questions. I get it. Thank you. No, I'm not allowed to win things. Does anybody have a question? Somebody? Yes, over here. I have to get you to come up to the microphone because I'm not allowed to do the whole share the microphone anymore because of the plague. I just call it the plague. You know, let's face it. All right, just there. Can you drop the mask down? That should be on there. Just that's you right. Can for the question. Off you go.
Yeah, guys, very interesting presentation. Myself, we're just starting off in the horror genre. So, you know, what's happened the last 2 years to the world? Like, how is that is this going to bring back a horror into the mainstream?
Like, in terms of tastes, we're sort of living horror every day. Yeah. So usually as a genre, a literary genre, it gets a boost. Like in World War II, horror got a boost. Yeah. You know, especially you saw the Universal monster movies and things like that just went berserk. I think when times are tough... And the major publishers bought out armed services editions of horror books for the soldiers to read. So, yeah, every time there's something in the world that is negative, the horror genre seems to make a big comeback over that period of time because people like to get out of the real world and into a fantasy world. So,
can I ask one more question?
Yeah, go for it. Sure.
So what scared you guys as kids?
I was a wuss. I used to cry at Doctor Who when I was a kid.
That scared me as a child. Yeah, Doctor Who.
We won't tell Chris that tomorrow. Okay, Chris Eccles. By the way,
and those old early black and white horror movies like Frankenstein and stuff like that. As a 6 to 7 year old, scared the heck out of me.
But again, the ones that employed imagination rather than visual effects to give you the horror. Yeah. I've been dealing with the horror genre for 63 years every time I look in the mirror. So I think we're just about it, aren't we? 5 more minutes. We got more questions. Who else wants to ask a question? No. We got another question yet.
Yes.
Could be a better question.
Yeah,
Up you jump. Speaking of Doctor Who's, now you're in trouble. Now you're in trouble, Bryce. Okay, ask away, please.
Firstly, sorry about the phone thing before. It was really bad timing.
It's all right. We forgive you. Only just.
That's fair. That's fair. My question is, what drew you guys to the horror genre?
Ooh. Look, I personally came to the horror genre via comic books. I can actually tell you the trajectory. It was Spider-Man and Batman, and then Marvel Comics Spider-Man and the Hulk and Daredevil, and then Marvel published a comic called The Tomb of Dracula. And I started reading that, and then I went and read Bram Stoker's Dracula and went, this is great. And then I just started devouring horror literature. I'd actually been more of an SF guy when I was a little kid, and I was reading Robert Heinlein when I was 8 years old and stuff like that. But I went around via that route. I can remember it distinctly. What about you, mate?
Basically, the Brothers Grimm, was that the Tinderbox and all of those? Yeah, I think one of the first stories I read as a child was, it was called The Tinderbox, about this soldier coming back from war, and he met this warlock or witch or something, and she said, you can't pass unless you do these 3 tasks for me. And so he had to go down under this tree trunk into a cave. And then each part of the cave he went into, there was a dog. And some of them had big eyes, and the next one had bigger eyes. And then one had eyes as big as saucers. And I could just picture this big, massive dog with huge eyes. And it just scared the hell out of me as a kid, like being in this underground cave, coming across this massive animal. And just, I absolutely loved the Brothers Grimm. And then I moved on to other stuff as I grew up.
Okay, so now the difficult part. We had 2 questions. Shall we leave it to the audience to decide so you guys don't get in trouble? So this way you don't get in trouble. All right. Applause for first question. Okay. Applause for second question.
I'll tell you what. You get the free book, but you come and see us and you can have a discount. All right, if you
All right.
wish. You can have
You're a very
what a
generous
gentleman.
person.
What a gentleman.
In that case, you get the discounted version and you can have a freebie. All right, guys, will you please welcome Chris, thank Chris and Bryce for being with us today.
Thank you.
Legends, go and talk to them, chat to them. They'll tell you more about all their projects. I've been fortunate enough now to do what? We've done like 6 or 7.
We have, mate.
And it's been really good. I get to learn.
We'll have to put you on payroll.
I know. Well, yeah. Get to see all their stuff that's coming out. Because what was it? Was it book 4? What was it last April in Gold Coast you just launched?
Deep Down Under Volume 3, which
that's
is
right, it was 3, yeah.
4th of the books, but 3rd in the
that was
Aussie
3,
one, yeah.
And the guys have all the books at their counters. Make sure you go and talk to them. Give them a big round of applause. Chat to them over there, because we do have to clear the room to get the next group in. Thanks, guys, very much.
Thank you for doing this, Peter. We're in the last.